Committee on Public Accounts.
And the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, April 24th, 2023. The committee resumes its study of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. I'd now like to welcome our witness. From the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, we have Mr. Edward Johnson, Chair of the Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us today soon. Ms. Johnson, before I give you 5 minutes, I think I've got a, yes, Ms. Sinclair-Desgagne.
Oui, appel au règlement.
Yes, call to order. I have a question related to validation. I'd like to read something and ask you to confirm the passage of the procedural code from the House of Commons. The interpreter does not have a text of this. It is generally expected that witnesses will tell the truth, whether or not they will have sworn an oath. Given that testimony is protected by parliamentary privilege, if a committee determines that a witness lied, or if it is determined that a witness has lied, they can be found guilty of contempt. Is that the case?
Anyone appears? I'll just turn to the clerk for I'm getting the affirmative that is correct, and that is a standard rule regulation that oversees all business before the committee. On this same point of order, Ms. Shanahan. So.
Yes. So I would just like to review with the clerk then the usual procedure when witnesses are invited. Is that not the kind of thing that is discussed with them? And it's obvious. It's clear that that is the duty of the witness when they come before Parliament. If the clerk could just explain a little bit of how witnesses are invited and how we do that in a respectful and professional manner.
I will. Just 1 sec, please. Instead of trying to repeat, I will just ask the clerks to just state that. You can.
So basically, when the witnesses are invited to appear at the committee, they are coming with the will to say the truth. So we are going with the basics that they are saying the truth. Okay,
so I think this is resolved. Mr. Johnson, I apologize for that. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please. And if you need a few more seconds, I do allow witnesses to finish up their thoughts. I'm diligent with the clock, but I will endeavor not to ever cut you off. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try to stay within that constraint. The Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation is a nonpartisan charitable scholarship foundation created in 2002 with broad cross-party support in the House of Commons. The first board of directors included Bill Davis, Roy Romano, and Peter Lougheed. It was granted a $125 million endowment by the government, and since then it has spent some $95 million on program, plus another approximately $20 to $25 million on delivering those programs on the administrative side. So in total an amount that's pretty close to the original endowment. During that time we have provided 295 doctoral scholarships, plus mentorships and fellowships, 88 fellowships and 163 mentorships. We achieved that without touching the capital, which now stands at $145 million, and we have not asked for a cent of new money from the government in 21 years. Today we rank up there with Rhodes, MacArthur, and Fulbright as a sought-after scholarship. Many of our scholars say their involvement was life-changing. Our directors and members are all volunteers. The Trudeau family has no financial interest whatsoever in the foundation. Foundation over the past 21 years is doing what it was supposed to do with the taxpayers' money. In tight compliance with our funding agreement, we deliver a very simple 4-point program: scholarships, mentorships, fellowships, and a public international program. We are meant to make a significant contribution to the future of Canada, and we have delivered to the letter. But the foundation has been subjected to unwarranted and unfair attacks beginning in late February, revolving around a donation totaling $140,000 from a Chinese-Canadian entity, putting huge pressure on the board of directors. In this context, let me note on record for this committee that we were never offered $1 million and we never received any red flags from CSIS. It's important that I respond to some earlier testimony by our former president and 3 former directors at the House Ethics Committee. At no time did any director receive a legal opinion that they were in conflict of interest involving the 2014 to 2017 Chinese donation. And in my case, I didn't need a legal opinion to tell me what I instinctively knew. I was on the board at the time of those donations, so I should not be involved in the oversight of any outside review of them, although my potential conflict of interest might have been purely perceived, but although not legal. At no time did I resist or attempt to narrow such an independent review. Indeed, within 10 days of the first news story, I urged that we needed an independent review and that it should be overseen not by management, not by me, but by a special committee of 3 directors who had had no involvement whatsoever in the foundation in the years 2014 to 17. I phoned every board member individually in mid-March and discussed this. On March 24th, I remarked to our lawyers how supportive our directors were of our president and me in the trying circumstances of intense national attention. I proposed oversight by an independent committee at the full board meeting on March 31. As to my eligibility to chair that meeting, there is no doubt. My interests align perfectly with the interests of the foundation. I wanted an independent review, and so did the rest of the board. And it was my duty as chair to preside. There were 2 outside lawyers from 2 firms advising the board at that meeting, present at that meeting, and both said they had not given opinions on conflicts of interest. Neither they nor any director questioned my legitimacy to chair or to vote at that meeting. And at no point was there a motion for any directors to recuse themselves, nor was there any refusal to do so by any director. Over the subsequent week, by Easter Thursday, a consensus emerged among most directors, in my view, that indeed the outside review should be overseen by a special committee of 3, as I had originally recommended, and that review should not report to management. To my utter surprise and disappointment, the board resigned on Easter Monday, April the 10th. Knowing that those resignations would stall any outside review for weeks, I wrote the Auditor General on April 14th, 3 days after the board resignations, to ask her to investigate all aspects of the receipt and handling of these donations by the foundation. I have finally just a word for our scholars, mentors, and fellows. Looking ahead, I want to say a special word to them and to our marvelous team at the foundation and to our community. The Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation will continue to provide its outstanding academic program. Thanks to the volunteers on our finance committee, we continue to be well-financed. Our excellent team are working ahead on the announcement of our next cohort and planned leadership development events. It's an exciting future heading into our 23rd year. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for the alarm. That was not my intention, but I have a new stopwatch. I'm going to endeavor to fix that so I don't interrupt MPs. But MPs know that I will stop them when the buzzer goes, but I will allow the witness to, thank you, to finish answering a question. So, colleagues, my attempt this morning, just so you know where I'm coming, is to get through 3 full rounds. So I will be watching the clock particularly close. That takes just under an hour and 15 minutes, which is what I have scheduled. So without further ado, Mr. Brock, welcome to committee. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Johnston. Johnson. My apologies, sir. Welcome to committee. If you may or may not remember, we had an opportunity of talking to each other just over a month ago. And I want to basically start off by completing the circle, so to speak. I left you to consider following through on a couple of undertakings. Do you remember that exchange that you and I had, sir?
I do indeed, and we responded, the foundation responded the next day, I hope, adequately to the three requests.
I haven't seen that correspondence. I'm not impugning your credibility, your character, sir, by any stretch. It may have gone to the committee, but it didn't actually come to my attention. Are you able to elaborate as to the details that I had asked you to consider?
Yeah, indeed. If you allow me, I'll just, I can read a relatively short email, which was in response to your questions.
Thank you.
Please find below the information requested. There's a recital at the beginning to the clerk of the committee. And then please find below the information requested. On March 1st, 2023, upon the initiative of the President CEO, Pascal Fournier, and with the approval of the board's executive committee, the foundation sent a check in the amount of $140,000 to reimburse the donation that had been received by the foundation in two $70,000 tranches in 2016 and 17. Check was signed by directors Bruce McNiven and Peter Salas, drawn to the order of Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada, the Canadian corporation that made the donations, and sent via Canada Post. I'm going to just summarize, because I know your time is limited, so I'll just whip through some of these paragraphs. But the foundation issued a statement the same day declaring that it had been refunded. But on March 21st, 2023, after 3 failed delivery attempts, Canada Post returned to the foundation the envelope containing the reimbursement check. After the resignation of the President and CEO on April 10th, 2023, the directors learned that in early April, foundation staff, reporting to the President, had contacted the Bank of Montreal to confirm the origin of the 2 payments back in 2016 and 17. And the bank had confirmed in April 23 that both payments were received by electronic transfer from the Canadian corporate entity listed on the CRA receipts that had been issued by the foundation, and the two payments originated from its Montreal, that is the donor's Montreal bank account, which was still open in 2023 and in good standing. This information had never been provided to the board, which had recently been led to believe that one of the two $70,000 payments may have originated in China and that the foundation's CRA receipts may have been improperly issued. On April 12, 2023, the $140,000 check that had been returned to the foundation by Canada Post was delivered directly to the donor's downtown Montreal branch of the Bank of Montreal. Check was provided to the donor's account manager at the branch, who deposited the check immediately and confirmed the deposit in writing. The foundation is taking the appropriate steps with the CRA in regards to the above. CRA receipts that had been issued in 2016 and 17 were both issued to the same Canadian corporation, Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada. First receipt was addressed overseas, and the second receipt, approximately 1 year later, was addressed to the corporation's Canadian address.
And the latter part of what you just described to me, sir, did that come from the bank, that information?
Which part? The fact that the account was there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And what you read out is the information that was transferred to the Ethics Committee the day after your testimony?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I'm reading from the memo to the clerk of the Ethics Committee.
Okay. There's a couple of issues that I have with that. So from your perspective, sir, $140,000 has been redeposited electronically in the bank account, the Canadian bank account of Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada, Inc. Is that correct?
I'm not sure it was electronically. I think the check was delivered to the bank. The same check that had been attempted to be delivered some weeks earlier.
Okay. And did you receive any confirmation?
Yes.
From Millennium
upon
receipt of
not
the
from
monies
Millennium.
going? Sorry, if I could just
Sorry,
talk
pardon
one
me.
at a time, sir. Did you receive a receipt some type of acknowledgement from Millennium that they in fact had received $140,000 directly into their bank account?
Not to my knowledge. The bank, it was confirmed to us by the bank that the funds have been deposited to that account, but to my knowledge, there is no response from Millennial.
Okay. Did you
You
exercise,
have 20
sir,
seconds, Mr. Brock.
Did you exercise any due diligence, sir, to determine who the directors are of that corporation?
I believe, I did not, but I believe people at the foundation did, and determined who was in charge. And I do know that a letter was also sent informing Millennial to Millennial's Canadian address. And I don't believe we received a response to that letter.
Thank you. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for appearing today and for your fulsome opening statement that provides a lot of background. So just building on that, as someone who's been involved with the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation since its inception in 2001, can you provide a summary of how the foundation was created, what its initial mandate was, and how its mandate and operations have evolved over the past 22 years?
Thank you. Yes. Well, its mandate was it was to do essentially what we're doing today, to provide a 4-element program: scholarships, mentorships, fellowships, and public international program, interaction program, public interaction program. And we were to provide our scholarships as doctoral scholarships in the social sciences and the humanities. And the reasoning at the time was that, I believe it remains even more true today. We are awash in scholarships in the fields, and doctoral scholarships in the fields of applied science, technology, engineering, and so on. But what's lacking is adequate support in social sciences and humanities, which arguably is the backbone of a democratic society and an advanced society, studying human rights, civil liberties, foreign policy, Canada's place in the world, these issues that don't get studied in a technology school. And so that was the rationale behind it, and that was essentially our program. Now, where's the value added? Why is a Trudeau scholarship different from any other? I think the big element is our leadership program, which takes scholars out of their comfort zone and introduces them through mentors and fellows and through other people to aspects of Canada and the world that they would not otherwise be introduced to. And we call that engaged leadership. And we believe that adds a certain value to a Trudeau scholarship that doesn't necessarily obtain in other cases. We've done 295 of those scholarships. They're very substantial, and it's very highly regarded and very sought after. We had many hundreds of applications for a dozen openings last year.
Can you expand on very substantial? Can you quantify that?
Yes, it's $60,000, $40,000 in straight scholarship money. There's a travel allowance of, I believe, about $10,000. And here's another value-added aspect: $5,000 to work to improve the scholars' language capabilities. Usually, scholars spend that in the other official language other than their mother tongue. But we've had some amazing results with that money. We have people, particularly those who are bilingual and didn't really need to do work in another official language, and they have, one of them I remember distinctly was learning Huron, the indigenous language. And I think it's testimony to the quality of the people we are bringing in as scholars and also to the value added of our program.
And there's 12 of these scholarships awarded
That's
every
correct.
year.
We have 13 scholars in total, I believe, this past year, and of which 12 were straight Trudeau scholars, and one was under the Trudeau Green Scholarship Program. A benefactor has agreed to sponsor one additional scholarship.
Okay, thank you. So just to refresh our memory, did all political parties support the creation of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation?
There was no vote in the House, but there were statements of support, and it was overwhelmingly in favor. There was one party who predictably was a little lukewarm, and but the NDP, the Conservatives, Liberals, etc., were very supportive.
And you've already stated that it's a nonpartisan charitable foundation.
Correct.
So now, are the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation scholarship recipients vetted according to their partisan or ideological leanings? No.
Absolutely not.
And what about the foundation board members? Are they vetted according
No.
to the?
No, for political involvement?
No,
No.
or ideological leanings?
No.
Okay.
No.
What about the foundation staff? Same
No.
situation?
No way.
So what is the relationship between the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and the federal government?
We have a funding agreement, and that is the source of our connection, and our only connection is through the funding agreement with ISED, the Department of Innovation, Science, Economic Development. And as I mentioned earlier, we have been studiously pursuing compliance with that agreement over the 21 years, and we've delivered to the letter on the expectations set out in that agreement.
So you originally got
Ms. Bradford, that is the time, but we will come back to you. But that was a good discussion. Turning now to Madame Sinclair-Desgagne, vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Johnson for appearing here today. First of all, I would have something to say on the context of our study. And you mentioned this earlier. We don't have, at the Bloc Québécois, we have nothing against scholars or the principle, the honorable principle of giving out scholarships to brilliant students. That's not where we are, but I think it's important to specify that a not-for-profit organization has a certain responsibility when funding has been received with regards to governance and transparency, and that is the subject on which I will ask my questions. I'd like to confirm in your opening statements, you mentioned that the two $70,000 gifts, the receipts, I believe, so both receipts were made out to Millennium Eagle. Both receipts were made out to that company name in Canada? Yes. Millennium Golden Eagle International, Canada. And that's the name on the receipts. Also, on one of the receipts, there was the name of both individuals who discussed with University of Montreal, because we have to remember that this entire discussion of a donation began when our ambassador to China presented at University of Montreal to a certain Binzang, and according to what we were able to understand, he was in charge of this company, and he is the one who led negotiations with the university. And then the university asked Alexander Trudeau, actually, who testified before the committee a few weeks ago, if the university could use the name of Mr. Pierre Trudeau because this was following a gift of $400,000 in prior years to the medical school at University of Toronto in the name of Norman Bethune. This time it was in memory of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who opened up relations between Canada and China. Thank you. Thank you. My time is limited. So you seem very well informed on this donation to University of Montreal. When you appeared before the Ethics Committee, there seemed to be a lot of information missing with regards to this donation of $140,000 that was given. I forget the name. So it seems surprising to me, at the very least, that you were not aware of this donation, knowing that you were on the audit committee that same year. So if I look at the processes of that committee, I have them here. The audit committee ensures that the foundation ensures transparency and oversees independent auditing. Yes, that's the role of the committee. Yes, exactly. So it seems unbelievable, if you'll allow me to say that you would not be aware of donations received at the foundation when you're a member of this committee. Mr. Johnson, how can you explain this? We have to remember what Warren Buffett said. He was saying a few years ago, audit committees don't audit. It's not the role of the audit committee to audit each expense, each donation, all those types of details. We also have to remind ourselves of the difference of the role played between management on one side and the board of administration on the other side. The role of management is to propose and implement. The role of the board is to oversee, approve, and to ensure that the work has been carried out. But for a volunteers committee to know in detail the detail of each donation for each year, it's just not possible in any organization. How much did the foundation receive that year? In general, we had the figure at the time. I don't recall. I believe it was around 1 million or 1.5 million. So it's about 10% of what the foundation received. It's a huge amount. It's small within the context of the foundation. It's a fraction of a percentage, really, of our endowment. 10 seconds? Okay, I'll come back a little bit later. Thank you.
Desjarlais, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I do also want to thank Mr. Johnson for being present with us today. As I'm sure you're aware, if you've been to the House of Commons here in several committees, I understand that you're at Privacy and Ethics as well, maybe 4 weeks ago now.
Right.
And at that time, one of our committee here, and in correlation with some of the other committees, of course, are taking on the work of trying to find the best way forward to ensure that Canadians have the kind of integrity and trust in the system that is most important to our country, which is our democracy. And so I want to attempt to ask you questions that will provide the most information against what is, I understand, a very politicized environment. And so I want to recognize that very important fact and attempt to find reason and good information from you to try to better the understanding, but mostly better the attempt for Canadians to understand this in a better way, in a way
Fair
that
enough.
is agreed. And so at the committee, you were asked by one of my colleagues from Hamilton Centre, this is what he had asked you, quote, would you agree that one of the best ways to provide the most amount of clarity around this, because we've now sat through many witnesses, and I'm not sure we have clarity, would be to include in a public inquiry, should David Johnston, at the end of his special rapporteur position, present that? At that time, you went on, your response was, quote, I don't think that would be necessary in order to clear the name of the foundation, end quote. Do you remember that?
Vaguely,
meeting?
yeah.
Yep. So now, over a month has passed since that moment, And of course, just recently we found that the special rapporteur did not recommend a public inquiry. Has your opinion, given the situation that it's presented itself across Canada, changed in that matter of fact, in particular to trying to build confidence in Canadians for how important our democracy really is?
I haven't really changed my view. I don't believe that that sort of inclusion would be constructive or necessary. I think, as I said in my opening comments, I have promoted the idea of an independent outside review of the donation. We're talking here of $140,000 in a foundation whose current capital is over $145 million. And I believe that it's, I don't believe it would be constructive or necessary.
In the sense that I believe it's necessary and that I believe it's important is because perceptions are often as damaging as the truth. And in fact, our democracy is something that deals oftentimes with opinion and perception together. And so as responsible legislators, as responsible leaders in our community, and as folks that want to attempt to uphold the most sacred practices of our institutions, it's to that effect why I believe a public inquiry is necessary, beyond the facts of making your foundation guilty or not. Just the fact that it's a public concern now and weighs into the public consciousness as to the credibility of our democracy. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I don't believe that there's a lack of transparency on our part in any way. We've been quite transparent about at the foundation about this donation and about the circumstances surrounding it. And we've returned the donation. So, what's left to inquire? What I think we should do, if I may, but what I think is constructive is an independent outside review of the circumstances. As I said in my note here, all the circumstances.
What I did appreciate from your work thus far, in order to try to clear the name of the foundation, was in fact that you did ask the Auditor General to look into an investigation. So in some ways, I do recognize that there has been some action. But in your contemplation of requesting that of the Auditor General, there has to be some admission that there is something of perception that is wrong.
There were allegations.
Exactly.
Quite unfair.
Perception.
Very unfair allegations, which I must say, said over and over again. This is very unfair. We're a donation, the receipt of a donation in 2016, negotiated in 2014-15, received in 2016 and 17.
Mr. Johnson, sorry, I just want to get back to the important piece of my question related to your request to the Auditor General and why you felt it was important to send that letter.
Well, because there was a perception,
exactly.
There was an argument.
So would you agree
there were allegations, quite unfair allegations.
Yeah, and you said that, I've heard that. Would you agree, however, that we received the Auditor General in this committee to ask her the question of whether or not this would take place, whether or not she would investigate. At that time, she told us it was not within her parliamentary power. So, of course, it was my motion at that time, which I thought was incumbent upon this committee, to look at other means to do it. The CRA, for example, is one of those arms, and it's independent, and it has the power to look at and second information related to this. Would you agree that the CRA may be an important aspect to this investigation?
It would be up to them. Up to the CRA if it wanted to do that. But if I to finish,
would you consent to that?
I'm sorry.
Would you consent to the CRA?
Of course, if the CRA comes calling, any taxpayer pays attention.
Has the CRA contacted the organization?
We've endeavored to be compliant in all respects of the Income Tax Act and our obligations to the CRA.
Of course, I'm not making that allegation. I'm
afraid that is your time, Mr. Desjarlais.
Of course, thank you, Chair.
Yes. During now for our start of our second round. Of course, each round has 6 questioners. Mr. Rock, you have the floor again for
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Mr. Johnson, I just want to clarify, it is your belief today, as I believe it was your belief when you last testified before ethics, that $140,000 came from a Canadian corporation, correct? The Millennium Golden Eagle Corporation?
That is my belief.
Okay. Either, sir, you have not done enough research on this particular issue, or your handlers or someone within the foundation is not giving you the straight goods. Because the foundation gave the Ethics Committee a series of documents, and I'm looking at one particular document, which is a banking document from your institution, the BMO, that has the Trudeau Foundation as its customer. And on July 25th, 2016, the foundation received not a Canadian donation, but rather an international donation of $70,000. Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I'm not sure it makes a difference.
Well, I think it makes a big difference, sir,
Well,
with all due respect. It makes a big difference because the committee members presented to you on May the 9th a series of red flags that someone with your intellect and your business acumen and the fact that you are a lawyer, in fact, you're the chair of the foundation, should have raised a number of red flags. Now, I know you went into that committee as you went into this committee talking about unfair, ungrounded allegations. But let's talk about facts. We're not talking about simple intelligence. We're not talking about simple rumors. We're talking about an intercepted, recorded conversation between CSIS and one of the donors, Mr. Bin Zhang, and a Toronto consulate, who was promised as follows. The donors, Mr. Bin Zhang was told by the Communist Party in Beijing to offer the money in the hopes of influencing the new Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau. And surprise, surprise, money flows in, foundation reaches an agreement with Mr. Zhang and Mr. Ginshang. Within 5 months, both of those businessmen, those Chinese, not Canadian businessmen, Chinese businessmen, were granted private access to the newly minted Prime Minister. That didn't raise a red flag to you. Furthermore, sir, we have a real discrepancy when it comes to the tax receipts. The first tax receipt I brought to your attention was issued to the Millennium Golden Eagle International Canadian Incorporated Company with an address in Hong Kong. And then Beijing interfered, contacted the foundation, contacted to one of your employees and said, sorry, wrong address, send it to Beijing. And I told you, sir, that the address that Millennium Golden Eagle International Canadian Inc. originally gave the foundation was fake, because there was a reporter who went to Hong Kong and knocked on the door. They never heard of the corporation, or they never heard of Mr. Bin Zhang or New Genshing. And that didn't raise any red flags to you as the chair of the board either, did it?
Well, to be fair, we wouldn't have been aware of any of that at the time. But also, I must say,
well, hold on, sir.
Story.
The foundation was aware of that, because the foundation was contacted by Beijing to redirect the receipt.
I've looked at that.
So, sir, with due respect, you were aware of that. Now, the second receipt that came in 2017 lists the same corporation, this time to an address in Brossard, Quebec, listing Ben Zhang and New Genshing, notwithstanding that this particular address does not accord with the address that the corporation was registered under, which is in Dorval, Quebec. Did you know that, sir?
I've heard that. Again, the difference between a registered address and a business address can be, with many corporations,
well, so I think it's
quite
important
different.
because your past CEO, Mr. Rosenberg, misled, in fact, lied to Canadians. And I would probably suggest misled Canada Revenue Agency by suggesting that this was, in fact, a Canadian donation as opposed to a foreign donation.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
that was
Brock.
the concern.
That is your time, Mr. Brock.
That was the concern Ms. Fournier had.
Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor now for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I would like to thank the witness for being here and offer Mr. Johnson, please take this opportunity to respond to some of the allegations that we heard from the other side.
Well, thank you. A couple of points to follow up on what Mr. Brock has laid out. Number one, the story that I did read alleged, and that started the ball rolling on February 28th, alleged that a consular official at the Chinese embassy had been in touch with Mr. Zhang in Canada and instructing him to give $1 million to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. The foundation was never offered $1 million. The $1 million went to the University of Montreal. So I have a difficulty connecting the allegation in that story with the facts. That story has never been confirmed, to my knowledge, by a government official, by CSIS, and there is the amount I want to underline that was actually received by the foundation was $140,000 over 2 years, and so it doesn't. The facts don't accord with the allegation. The use of a Hong Kong address. Is if I make a donation to the Red Cross, and I'm going to be in Florida at tax time, I ask the Red Cross to send the receipt to me in Florida in a different jurisdiction. But that doesn't make a difference. I'm a Canadian taxpayer, and I made the donation. And I've always felt that similar logic applies to the case of this particular donation. The donor was a Canadian corporation, which was Millennial Golden Eagle International Canada, and so that's the donor, and the receipt was made out to the name of that Canadian donor. Frankly, the receipt would be of no value to a non-Canadian taxpayer, to an entity that's not paying Canadian tax. And if I may just add one more broader thought from taking 10,000 feet, I am deeply concerned, to see the receipt of a donation in 2016 being judged by the standards of 2023 vis-a-vis China.
And why do you say that?
Because the context has changed so much. 2014, 15, 16, 17, all material times in connection with this donation, Canadian universities were falling all over themselves to develop relations with China. Canadian corporations, ditto. Government of Canada in 2014, I believe the Prime Minister of the day visited China, as did President of France and Chancellor of Germany. I mean, it was, the predictions were that China was going to be taking over the world economically. By 2045, it was going to pass the gross domestic product of the United States, and Canadians were working energetically to develop relations. And then, in the case of Canada, the two Michaels were kidnapped, and the world changed. Today, it's a fundamentally different world, and China has appears to have done some very nasty things, some utterly inappropriate things, and not only in Canada, but in other Western democracies. And there's a serious threat there that must be dealt with. But that wasn't the case in 2014, 15, 16, 17.
Well, thank you for that fulsome response, Mr. Johnson. I'd like to come back to what this committee does, actually. So we are the standing committee, the audit committee for the Government of Canada. And I very much enjoyed the remark that you quoted from Warren Buffett, that audit committees do not go line by line. And because if you've seen the public accounts, you know it's 3 volumes, and it is like this.
Indeed.
And thankfully so, because we have, of course, the very
Ms.
competent
Shannon, I'm
and
afraid I'm going to have to
professional-
interrupt. Your time has elapsed, and if that is a... Yes, so tournons maintenant à Madame Sinclair-Desgagne.
Mrs. Sinclair-Desgagne, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. To continue, well, I believe that there's diverging information from my colleague on the right, and yourself, Mr. Johnson, my colleague, just said that one of the receipts was sent to China, and you just told me that this receipt was sent to Canada. One moment. What I said is that the receipt was in the name of a Canadian corporation. And as I explained in my hypothetical example, if I give $100 to the Red Cross Canada, no, I have limited time. I did hear that. It's contradictory because if this company, even if it has a branch in Canada, if you send a receipt for donation to China, it's a company that, well, the receipt is being sent to China. Here's a question now on the potential conflict of interest that you spoke to in your statement. You said in your statement that you never received any legal advice, but have you received any informal advice on a conflict of interest from a lawyer? No. Informal from the executive, for example, of the foundation? Not from the executive. Not from the staff, but I did have discussions with one administrator, and they suggested that there might be a perception of a conflict of interest. Yes, Mrs. Adams, who just testified at the Ethics Committee, said that during several meetings, they said that you had a conflict of interest because you sat on the audit committee of the foundation when the foundation received this donation, so that you were in a conflict. Why don't you think it was a conflict? Because it really seems to be logical that you were in a conflict if you were sitting at on the committee at the time. I don't see the conflict. And when the executive says that there is a conflict, don't you think that rings a bell that you should withdraw? I seriously thought about this suggestion. I turned my mind to it, but I didn't agree with it. I spent 33 years as secretary and legal advisor in a huge corporation, public corporation in Canada and Quebec, based in Quebec. And in my judgment, I was not in a conflict of interest. Certainly not in a legal conflict of interest. But in any case, as I was saying in my opening statement, it was important for me that I not sit on the oversight of an investigation of the circumstances and the perception around these donations, but the appearance of Thank you.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, I'd like to continue on the important aspect of trying to find a way to see that this information, the information you're sharing with us and the information that is shared by my Conservative colleagues, and albeit the information shared by even the Liberal colleagues and the Bloc, of course, you can see that you're being asked questions from many different angles, and some questions are friendlier than others. And I'm of the most interest of trying to find a way, just like you in some ways, to have an independent but public inquiry because of this divergent political opinion. And I understand from your testimony today that you're opposed to a public inquiry. Could you explain, given the...
What do you mean by a public inquiry?
A public inquiry in the sense that there would be officials that would be independent. And
From government?
Independent, not in the sense that David Johnson was, for example. That is the question of perception, is that he wasn't independent. And so I'm saying that I want a public inquiry, and Canadians would like a public inquiry, where there isn't even a perceived conflict.
Right.
And I'm not talking about a legal conflict, which I heard very carefully you made mention of that, but as you know, especially in the legal profession, perceived conflicts are almost just as dangerous. In particular, when we're thinking of something so important like Canadian democracy, which we often don't have to think about in a country like Canada, where we often believe it's very secure. In this case, Canadians are nervous. And you made mention in your own comments just to Ms. Shanahan in questions about China. You said, quote, "They're a serious threat. They must be taken care of," end quote. How does one take care of that when we don't have the cooperation, let's say, of civil society to look at, even if they are not guilty, which is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's important to have an independent public process that isn't appointment by the Prime Minister, for example. And I'm sure you would be able to
appointed by Parliament, do
agree
you mean? It would be appointed by Parliament?
Not by Parliament either. I'm
You got
speaking
about
more
20 seconds,
specifically
Desjarlais.
to a public inquiry, which is more similar to the public inquiries we've had in Canada in the past, which look at experts, maybe even a judge, perhaps, that could do some of this work. But I need to understand what you believe is in the best interest of Canadians, considering you have admitted that the Auditor General should investigate. So there is a level of perception that you've understood to be needed, to be changed.
Right. Well, I have advocated since early March for an independent outside review of all circumstances surrounding the receipt of this donation. And we have been, at the foundation, we've established an inquiry with two wise persons from outside the foundation with no relationship whatsoever, who have been working over the last couple of weeks at beginning to pursue an inquiry along that line, overseeing the work of legal counsel, who are doing the legal work in connection with the review of all circumstances surrounding the two donations.
Thank you very much.
And the receipt of those two donations.
That is the time. I'm going to go back to Mr. Brock, I believe. You have the floor for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Johnson, I understand that you know quite well our former Governor General, Mr. David Johnston.
Quite well would be an exaggeration. I've met him a couple of times.
Okay.
That's it.
He's a foundation member.
He was a member of the foundation from 2018 until, I think, earlier this year.
Right. And he left the foundation as a result of accepting the appointment as the special advisor to the Prime Minister. I'm
guessing that that's the case, but
it coincided really with the same day.
Important to understand what the role of the members is. The distinction between members.
I don't need to know the roles. Thank you. I just wanted to confirm the relationship aspect.
Yep.
Did, at any point in time prior to the release of his first report to Canadians, did he reach out to you in person, by letter, email, what have you, to discuss the circumstances surrounding the foreign interference issue pertaining to the foundation and the origins of the $140,000 check? Was that discussed between the two of you?
No, I have received no such communication from him.
Did any member of his team reach out to you to discuss that, sir? He's got a very vast firm full of lawyers and consultants and what have you. Did anyone, to your knowledge, reach out to a foundation member?
To the foundation, not to my knowledge, no.
To your knowledge?
No.
And you personally did not reach out to him to give your side of the story?
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Now, I understand that Ms. Fournier had some issues with respect to the donation, which ultimately led to her resignation. She, in fact, discovered that the Millennium Golden Eagle International Canadian Inc. Was, in fact, associated with Beijing, China's China Cultural Industry Association. She also found out that industry association was communicating with Trudeau Foundation employees about omitting information on a donation tax receipt. Now, the website of that China Cultural Industry Association says it adheres to the total leadership of the China Communist Party and was formed with state approval. It lists Mr. Zhang Bin as its president. As per that association, Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada has Bin Zhang as the chairman and was created with the approval of Beijing, China. Now, knowing what I know now, what Pascal Fournier has known about Millennium Golden Eagle, do you agree, sir, that given your vast knowledge of corporate law, of corporations in general governance, etc., would you agree with me, sir, that Millennium Golden Eagle International is in fact a shell company operated by Beijing, China?
I have no knowledge of any facts that would support that.
Okay. And would you agree with me, sir, that they proudly and publicly take their marching orders from the government in Beijing?
I have to say the same thing. I'm afraid I have no knowledge of what their relationship might be with their government.
Were you aware that Zhang Bin, one of the donors, was a political advisor to the communist regime based in Beijing?
I've read that, yep. Yep.
Was that known to you prior to your appearance, sir?
Today?
Yes.
Yes, I read about it a while ago.
Was it known to you at the time the donation was made?
No.
No?
No, not to me. No,
Okay.
and I must say...
So I'm having a really hard time understanding why Beijing is communicating directly with the foundation, not Zhang Bin, not Mr. Ginshing, not Millennium Golden Eagle situated in Canada, but Beijing giving instructions to the foundation about how the donation receipt should be titled and where it should go, and you as the chairman of the board just surprisingly has no knowledge of this.
I certainly had no knowledge at the time. I wasn't aware of the donation, and I first learned about it a couple of years after it had been made.
Well, I would hope, sir, that these people would be fired. This is a serious matter. It complicates the foundation and potentially exposes the foundation to legal risks with the Canadian Revenue Agency. Do you see that potential, sir?
I'm not convinced by some of these assertions and allegations. With great respect. I have my doubts about, I have looked at the 160 pages of information relating to, which I believe was every document that the foundation had that was provided some years ago. And
no, Mr. Brock, your time is up. I allowed Mr. Johnson just to answer his question. Turn now to Mr. Fragaskatos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll actually split my time with Ms. Shanahan, and I'll turn it to her first.
Well, thank you very much.
Am I timing this or you?
Yeah, thank you very
I've got a
much.
timer.
So I'm actually very interested in this question that you did ask the Auditor General to come and audit the foundation, which strikes me as the action of a chair and a foundation that has nothing to hide. But of course, it's not in the scope of her work. As it turns out. Yes. Does the foundation have auditors?
yes.
So you have outside auditors?
Yep.
Has that always been the case?
Yes, it has been, yep.
And indeed, I would think it would be with $145 million
$45 million.
under administration.
Of course.
Has it ever been the case that the auditors have come back with a less than clean audit of the foundation financials?
Never. We've had a clean opinion every year.
Were any red flags ever raised concerning donations, domestic, foreign, or otherwise?
No, not to my knowledge, and I was chair of the committee for a number of years and on it before that. And I recall no such allegations or concerns in respect of any of our donations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you for being here today, Mr. Johnson. Earlier, and I'm not sure if it was, I don't think it was in your testimony, actually. I think it was in response to a question from Ms. Bradford, my colleague next to me. you tied the social sciences and the humanities generally to democracy, and how the vision of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation takes very seriously the idea that the humanities, the social sciences in general, are central to the maintenance of democracy. I wonder if you could expand on that a bit.
Well, I remember reading a number of years ago an exchange in which somebody said, no, we should be shifting all our attention in education, particularly in higher education, to training people. Let's get out of teaching Shakespeare and Wordsworth, and why do we need to know Roman history? And it's the age of technology, and that's where the future is. And it's a waste of taxpayer money to be funding universities who do that. Someone else wrote in to this exchange that was going on in a newspaper, and said, no, in a time of rapid change, you teach the things that don't change. And social sciences and humanities take us into areas where, of course, there is new developments and new knowledge being uncovered, but they're the fundamentals of a democracy. So that's fundamental to, as I said, it's the backbone of a liberal democracy. Small L, I hasten to add.
Of course, noted. Mr. Johnson, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation has funded research of students focused on a number of different subjects, obviously. It's done so for a number of years, and those students, either currently receiving support, and certainly students who have benefited from support, I'm sure look at this situation with great regret, if not worry. I do have to ask you, where is the direction of the foundation going? This issue has become politicized from start to finish. Mm-hmm. What is the future of the foundation now?
Well, I was at pains to say in my opening remarks, the future is solid, and we have a bright future ahead of us, and we hope very soon to be announcing our next cohort of scholars, mentors, and fellows. And if you want evidence of the solidity of the foundation and its program, I think that'll be it. And on top of that, we are continuing to work ahead, as I think our current scholars would attest, continuing to work ahead on the various elements of our leadership program, so that events are taking place over the course of the summer, for example. There are a number of gatherings of scholars, fellows, mentors in various places around the country, but also internationally. So our value-added program, as I like to call it, in engaged learning is going strong, and so I hope that scholars will take heart.
Thank you very much. That's my time.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get through the third and final round again. Ms. Johnson, how are you doing? Do you need a little break, or are you good?
I'm okay,
good.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to keep rolling
in
here. We'll have you out here in about 25 minutes then. So turning now to Mr. McCauley, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Oh, it's actually Mr. Brock.
Well, Mr. Brock's on his chair, so the clock is running here.
Mr. Brock is running back.
All right, then, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for just under 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Chair. So it's unfortunate, Mr. Johnson, that it appears that your former CEO, Pascal Fournier, is the only one that has a strong level of honesty and ethics. Because when I listened to and reviewed the evidence of Mr. Rosenberg, Mr. Rosenberg saw the same red flags that Pascal Fournier did and did absolutely nothing about it. What I want to ask you, sir, though, is I've looked at some correspondence from Pascal Fournier dated March the 25th, 2023, to a number of board members. You're listed as the top line in that particular email. And she outlines all of her discoveries, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, event after event. literally almost without using the word fraud, in terms of her concerns about how you publicly stated that this donation was a Canadian donation, when it clearly was not. It was foreign from Beijing, China. But I think what is concerning me, and I want to ask you questions, sir, is that she asked your legal counsel, the foundation's legal counsel, a number of questions. Who was your legal counsel on March the 25th, 2023?
It was the firm of Borden, Ladner, Gervais.
BVG?
BLG.
BLG?
Yep.
Okay, that's out of Montreal?
Well, the Montreal office was
Okay.
our counsel.
Did you have a
but they're
particular lawyer that
national
oversaw the
firm.
file?
Yes. Let's see. We had Michael Gradinsky in the Montreal office.
Okay.
Who was involved
So,
with the file.
so she asked, or she was going to send, I should say, she's going to send 3 specific questions to legal counsel.
Yep.
The first question is in relation to the various tax receipts, the various names on the tax receipts. And the question put to legal counsel was, is this consistent with the law, both Canadian law and our own policy on acceptance of gifts? Is there anything we should be aware in terms of CRA and ISED compliance? Then number 2, one of the tax receipts includes an address in China without the names of the donors at the explicit request of the China Cultural Industry Association while mentioning the Quebec-based real estate company. Is this consistent with law, Canadian law, and policy? Is there anything we should be aware of in terms of CRA compliance? Did legal counsel receive the request to answer those questions, and what was their response?
I believe they did, and this was the whole idea here was these are issues that should be examined and in detail.
Examined by whom?
By legal counsel.
Yes. So
in
they
detail.
They looked into it and gave you an opinion?
No answer and no opinion has been received because a few days later, President Fournier fired that firm from the file and replaced them
With a different law firm?
with a different law firm.
Okay. Did the different law firm receive the same questions?
I believe they did.
Okay. Who
but
was the other law firm?
it was Miller Thompson.
All right. Did you get a response from Miller Thompson?
No
Why?
response because their involvement with that file terminated because it was found that they'd done some work for us. They were not independent of us.
Okay.
And
Did you go to a third law firm?
we have then within a very short time the board resigned, and so
Did you go to a third law firm?
we have now gone to a third law firm
ask
in the
these-
last few weeks
To have these questions
to
answered?
have those questions and others, a broad range of questions answered.
And who's the name of that new law
And
firm?
that is Norton Rose.
Okay. And when did you retain them to give you a legal opinion on these issues?
It would have been, I'm guessing, 2 to 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago at least. I was out of the country and not aware at the time, but I was not involved.
Okay. And are you prepared, sir? Are you prepared, given the highly important matter before Parliament on this particular issue, are you prepared to give us an undertaking to release portions of that legal opinion?
Thank you, Mr. Brock. That's your time. I'll allow a brief answer, Mr. Johnson.
Sure, yeah, we're happy to release, to tell the results of that inquiry.
Thank you very much.
And share them with whoever would be interested.
Turning now back to the government bench, Mr. Sidhu, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Pardon me, Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, no, I wasn't. Well, I can do it. I mean, I wasn't on the list. But.
I can start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be splitting my time with Ms. Bradford, but I'll start. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here today with us. And what I want to know more about is the important work the foundation does with students in helping them to provide support for students in their education. If you can speak a little bit more about how many students have been helped over the number of years, what the impact that's been on the youth across Canada.
I should point out at the beginning, we do doctoral scholarships. And we have done 295 scholarships of total of $60,000 a year for each scholarship, and the scholarships last for 3 years. And we've, in addition to that, we engage mentors. We've had we've had 163 mentors since we were started in 2001, or 2002 rather, and we've also done 88 fellowships. And the mentors and the fellows assist the scholars in their work and work at broadening their program outside the areas of their specific and so often very narrow areas of study, and take them into other aspects of life, of Canada, and of the world, in an effort to inculcate a sense, a leadership ability among these very high-flying scholars, and to ensure that they are, to try to encourage them to be able to share their knowledge with the broader public in ways that are understandable to Canadians. And so that's the essence of our program. On top of that, we have this public interaction program which is precisely that, where they get out and see parts of the country and broaden their horizons beyond their narrow areas of study.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, so you started out with a $125 million endowment, and it's now grown to $145 million. Can you tell me, without having to touch any of that capital, how do you fund and sustain these 12 scholarships, $60,000 a year?
Right. We use the income from the endowment.
Okay.
And so we've invested the endowment in a investment program. The asset allocation in that program is approved by the government, by the finance department and the ISED department, and so we're pretty conservative investors. But the result is that we've been able to provide through those investments dividend and interest income, as well as the odd capital gain. And that's been successful in funding our agreement and in our activities. And anything that any excess, if we're lucky enough to have a year where we exceed, goes back into the endowment. And that's why we're at 145, up from originally 125.
Sense of the kind of average rate of return that you're getting on your...
Yeah, the last 6 years or so, I think it's either 5 or 5.5%.
And what are some of the ways that Canadians can support the foundation?
Well, they can donate. We're always welcome, and I've made a pitch back in November to encourage everyone, including members of our community, to support us and assist us. Because I have to tell you, we need that help. There's a problem. Yes, we've built the endowment, but we're falling short of inflation. And as inflation grows, as inflation gets ahead of us, we have a gap between if we want to operate our same inflation-adjusted program as we started out with in 2022. Well, we think we should have something in the neighborhood of $170 million. So we got a gap to close there, and that's what we've been working on over the years in our development program.
And what are the short, medium, and long-term impacts of investing in students and their futures through scholarships, in your opinion?
Well, potentially huge over the long run. Among the people who have been through our program, we can count senior public servants, senior academics, people in the academic world, and people in public office who have been, for example, who have been through our program and I would argue have had their horizons broadened by it. Some have told us that it was life-changing for them. And I would commend a book by one of our scholars, an Indigenous gentleman named Jesse Thistle, who's written.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Maintenant, Madame Sinclair-Desgagne, vous avez la parole pour
2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back on my previous subject. You know, the appearance of a conflict of interest is oftentimes worse than the actual conflict. Some of your colleagues have testified, Mrs. Redfern, Mrs. Adams, Mrs. Fournier, before the Ethics Committee to say that they considered that you did have a conflict of interest. Why is your judgment, as you said, why does your judgment have precedence over 3 women from the foundation?
Because my vocabulary is failing me at the moment. But just to say that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I didn't need. J'avais pas besoin d'une.
I didn't need this advice because.
Saying, look, I should not be involved, nor should President Fournier, in the oversight of any independent inquiry. That's why I proposed that we set up an independent committee of 3 directors who had not been involved with the foundation in any way in 2014 to 18.
Thank you. Quick question. To your knowledge, did the foundation invest a part of its capital in Chinese companies? One of the administrators who appeared at the other committee last week, Mrs. Redfern, raised this issue 2 years ago, and we arranged a special meeting to discuss that at her request. Unfortunately, we weren't able to attend the meeting, but we did discover that, yes, in fact, we had 2 investments, and since that time, according to my information, we sold those investments. But do you think it's normal given the situation, especially since you sit on the Investment and Finance Committee, first of all, that you only realized 2 or 3 weeks ago that this is the case? No. So you already knew that there were these Chinese investments? It was 2 years ago. So you knew that and you thought it was normal? No. No, we divested ourselves of those investments. I can't tell you exactly when, but you allowed them to happen. Well, we told our financial managers to get rid of that. Normally, we don't really know what's part of the portfolio. So what we do is that we have policies, including environmental policy, social policy, and governance policy. And we describe the policy to our managers according to the recommendations made by the UN on these issues. And we usually invest in companies. We invest in companies that are conforming to these policies, and we meet with our managers to make sure that they are compliant with our policies. Thank you. Mr. Desjarlais, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Johnson, I do want to follow up on what I believe is the most important role for parliamentarians at this time, which I'd hope you can indulge me with attempting to empathize with the role that parliamentarians are in when we're seeing this tremendously concerning situation across the country that puts into doubt in the credibility of our institutions. And that's a real fact, whether it's true or not, the perception is damaging. And in order for us to clear the air, in order for us to have a true trust in these institutions, I believe it's important that a public inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act is important. It would provide for an independent commission that would have the powers that your organization, although it could establish one, wouldn't have the powers to subpoena, second documents, and to do the very, very things that are contemplated in the Public Inquiries Act. It's why we have a Public Inquiries Act. If organizations were able to just independently, quote unquote, independently audit themselves, the perception doesn't go away. The perception is you're going to be back here next year if that happens. Trust me, it's going to be continuous. It's just going to go on and on until we have true trust in the process. So the outcome is important, but the process is equally important as well, which is why I do appreciate your attempt to involve the Auditor General. Of course, that wasn't going to be the case. She said she wasn't able to do that. I made a motion here to have the CRA do that. And the reality with the CRA is that they have to undergo their own processes, and it's up to them as to whether or not they audit that, but it's a recommendation I have, and it's a recommendation of this committee. But a public inquiry, I think, would go a long ways to restoring not only the public faith that we have in our institutions, but also even in your institution. Wouldn't you agree?
Look, boy, things have changed in the intervening in the last 6 or 7 years. There's a lot to be very concerned about with China and with other governments.
Agreed, yeah.
And something has to be done. There's some really important and disturbing activities that have been carried on, particularly that are now being identified, particularly in the last few years. Now, whether that should be studied by a public inquiry is not something in which I have an opinion, and certainly not one that would matter.
Okay, that's actually beneficial,
I'm
because
afraid
that was
that is
different
the
than
time,
your
Mr. Desjarlais.
original
I
opinion. Thank you,
apologize
Chair.
about that, but that's I'm under the clock as well. Mr. Kram, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Johnson for being here today. I was wondering if we can just tie up some loose ends with the time that we have left. You had indicated that you were pouring through 165 pages of documents. Could you elaborate on what these 165 pages are for?
It's 160, which were provided, I believe the other committee, the Ethics Committee, has them, and we would be very happy to provide them to this committee if that's requested.
Yes, please. If you could please table them for this committee as well, that would be very helpful.
Okay, will do. And that's essentially, my understanding is that that's everything we had on the donations back in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, including the agreement, the receipts, all the relevant stuff, all the stuff, anything that breathed about that. Those donations is in that package, and with a lot of repetition, I have to say.
Okay. Now, you had indicated that you had asked the Auditor General to audit the foundation, but it was also indicated that you have auditors that audit the foundation every year. According to the financial statements on the foundation's website, it's PricewaterhouseCoopers.
PwC, correct.
So what do you suppose the Auditor General would find that PricewaterhouseCoopers missed?
Well, the way auditors work is they do random tests. We had here and that's how all auditors, PwC and everyone in that industry, does it. And they can't possibly be expected to go through line by line. The cost of that kind of audit would be horrendous. So their audit is not as thorough as a targeted. They do a shotgun. We wanted a rifle, and I wanted a rifle. And so I wanted it focused on the specifics of the receipt of, the receiving of, to be clear, these two donations and the circumstances around them in 2014, 15, 16, and 17. And that's, and I was not aware, I thought she'd do it. I thought we had a high probability that the Auditor General would accept it because we are a recipient of public money, and why wouldn't they? But she has said that no, we're outside. That specific thing would be outside her jurisdiction.
Okay, I only have a little bit of time left, Mr. Johnson. But when it comes to the donation from Millennium Golden Eagle and the circumstances surrounding the address in Dorval or in China, was any of that information withheld from PricewaterhouseCoopers when they did their audit?
To my knowledge, no. Absolutely. There would be no reason to withhold it, but it has to be said that that's really the purview of management, and I think it's really important to know and to recall the difference between the roles of directors and the role of management, and why I wouldn't know about something specific like that, because I'm not involved and directors are not involved in the day-to-day operations of the foundation, and nor in the dealing with the auditors on a case-by-case, file-by-file basis and line-by-line basis in the financial statements.
At the Ethics Committee on May 9th, you indicated that the foundation had bylaws, but you don't recall any specific bylaws that deal with foreign influence. You've had a month now to review the foundation's bylaws. Do you have any policies or bylaws to prevent foreign interference at this time?
There's nothing in the bylaws. We have significantly revised our donations policy in somewhere back in around 2021. We did I guess it's 2020, we did a review in depth of our donations policy. And particularly in the wake of those donations back and the news that was created, the stories that were created, without any knowledge whatsoever of the allegations, these so-called CSIS allegations. And so we've resolved that, and it would cover, those restrictions on examination of donations would be strict enough to ensure that we're not being unduly influenced by our donors.
And Mr. Johnson, I'm told I only have 30 seconds left, so I was wondering if you could table for the committee the old and new donations policy that the foundation now has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I believe I'm out of time, Mr.
You
Chair?
are.
And could I just, Chairman, a point of information,
Yeah.
to whom should we send it?
To the clerk of this committee, who does great work for us, keeping us on track and our documents in order.
Okay.
But thank you for asking, so it does get to us.
Okay.
And now turning back to the last speaking slot, or last question slot, I have Mr. Sidhu for a few minutes, and I understand you might split your time. That is your decision, but it's all yours for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being with us here today. When I think about Pierre Elliott Trudeau, I think about my parents who came to Canada in the early 80s, and I know what that means to them, to my father, to my family. It means it was an opportunity to come to a country to build a future, and that's something that my parents will never forget.
They must be proud of you. Must be very proud.
And it's an honor to sit here and represent my community and my family here at this table. But what I want to ask was, what does the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation name mean to the students that have gone through the scholarship programs? What does it mean for them? Why does that name have such a significant value? Well,
I hope it means something to at least some of them that would resonate. A lot of them weren't born when Mr. Trudeau was Prime Minister. But I think the values that he stood for, human rights, dignity, foreign policy, deep interest in foreign policy, and social policy, his interest in the social sciences and humanities were an important part of his legacy. And I hope, and I think it's probably the case, that most of our scholars would recognize the legacy, the importance of his legacy, and its influence on the foundation, particularly, as I was saying earlier, in the social sciences and humanities.
Thank you for that. No, it's very important. And when you speak about close to 300 scholars that went through this foundation, where do these scholars end up? Are they across Canada? Are they spreading the Canadian message abroad? What is it?
Yes, and we up to, I believe it's 20 or 25% of our scholars are non-Canadians. And so most years we have a significant non-Canadian element. So we have graduates of our program. There are graduates of our program I think I can safely say literally around the world. We have, our community is quite broad, so both here in Canada and internationally. And the contribution, again, you know, you get a cohort of 12 to 14, 15 scholars, of whom 2 or 3 are from outside Canada. The exchanges are so rich. Again, the changing of the lives of a number of our scholars has been invaluable and continues to be, I believe.
And it's good to see that the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, the name Pierre Elliott Trudeau, it represents opportunities for not only immigrants but also for scholars here in this country, and so it really provides that opportunity to grow and really give back and share the Canadian values with those that are like-minded. And I'm going to turn to my colleague to kind of finish off the last minute and a half.
Thank you very much. Can I just go back, Mr. Johnson, to my previous question in the earlier round? You said that the foundation will continue. You're quite confident in that. That's great, because the foundation has done very good work supporting students. But let me just challenge you on that a bit. We've seen other organizations where issues have become politicized. Their future has been thrown into real question and jeopardy. You are confident then that the organization will continue to be able to support students in the way that it has? Very much so. And I have every reason to believe that there continues to be an enthusiastic interest in applying for a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation scholarship. I think the proof will be in the tasting. I hope that we will be announcing our next cohort in the coming days. And I think that'll be evidence of the vibrancy of the foundation and the continued success of its program. And as I was mentioning earlier, we're going to be also doing the the value-added programs, the engaged leadership program, and ensuring that our scholars continue to have that extra dimension to their scholarship. Okay. And there was an Indigenous student, is it, that you wanted to speak about but didn't have enough time? Yes, Jesse Thistle, who wrote a very moving book on his rise from the ashes, having done prison time and having had a very rough ride through life, and who turned himself around, got a BA, an MA, and then was given a Trudeau Foundation scholarship. And he has said over and over again, it changed his life. And I think Canada has benefited hugely from his experience, and in fact, from all dimensions of his very textured life.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That is our time, Mr. Johnson. I do want to thank you.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Just one.
Point of order. Yes. Yes, I have an important clarification to make. The receipts, the tax receipts that were mentioned by Mr. Johnson, as well as the bank statements, is this in the 160 pages that will be sent to the committee? The receipts are included. What else? The bank statements showing the donations. Our bank statements? They are not included, but I can arrange that. Yes, please. Thank you.
C'est-à-dire, en anglais, je dirais, en bon français, je dirais bank statements.
Oui, c'est ça. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Ms. Johnson, I appreciate you coming in today. Thank you. We might see you my way, I understand, if you're ever back for one of the meetings with the Atlantic Salmon Federation. So I know. Very, very good then. So look, I will suspend this meeting just for a few minutes. We're going to go in camera, and we'll take a few points up here. I know there are flights. We're going to talk about that right off the bat. But Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. If you can clear the room of people who should not be here. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay, and we'll start up in about 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.